Thank you, Charles, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here in Perth. It's actually a pleasure to be here in Perth on this particular Friday. These are historic times for Scotland. 5 years ago, you could never have imagined that Rangers would play Stenhousemuir in a league game on a Saturday. That isn't meant to be flippant. If you didn't laugh at that, I'm sorry. In the research I conducted ahead of this, the campaign for Scottish Home Rule began in earnest almost as soon as unification with England took place in 1707. At the time, the view was that Scotland was desperate for cash, but opponents of the move were outraged by claims that the Scots who put their names to the Act of Union were bribed. The episode moved Scotland's bard, Robbie Burns, to write, "We are bought and sold for English gold, such parcel of rogues in our nation." I hope we don't have a parcel of rogues either on the floor or on the stage. BIBA represents the interests of insurance brokers and intermediaries and their customers. Insurance brokers and intermediaries play a crucial role in the identification, quantification and mitigation of risk, allowing individuals to insure their cars and possessions and for businesses to transfer financial risks off their balance sheets and onto insurers. BIBA has around 2,000 corporate insurance broking and intermediary members, of which around 100 are based here in Scotland. Of the approximately 3,500 insurance broking and intermediary firms in the UK, we believe around 5% are based in Scotland. Now look, I can't compete with the detail or indeed the time at the lectern spent by Owen. That was a fantastic presentation. So I will summarise what I can. This is much more, I think, you'll get a feel of collecting questions rather than giving answers. And as part of that collecting questions process, we were visited by Her Majesty's Treasury about 6 or 7 months, I think it was April time. And they said, look, we've been charged by ministers with gathering together information on what would the problems be if there was a yes vote in the independence referendum. And that led to a couple of hours of blue sky thinking. And I will share with you what we came up with. And Owen hasn't looked across and read my notes and delivered them just now. There are a lot of similarities. Currency is going to be a particularly interesting one. What currency will you have here? It's not a given that if you join the EU, you will want to join the single currency. We are, in Great Britain, in the EU, but we're not in the single currency. So currency will be an issue, and it is not a given that there will be, as Owen said, an agreement between Great Britain and an independent Scotland. The tax regimes are almost certainly going to be different, and contract law will be different. You already have Scottish law here. We have UK law south of the border. That will lead to different contract law issues. Now, when we have members come to us and say, what are the issues when insuring your customer with an insurer overseas? We always highlight three things. What is the situation on complaints? Now, in the UK, we have the Financial Ombudsman Service. You won't have that if you vote yes. You'll need to create an Ombudsman Service. What's the position on compensation? We have the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. You'll need to build one. And then the third question we always say to customers, what is the legal jurisdiction of the contract? If you have to sue the insurer, where do you go for that? So those are the three things the insurance brokers are giving to their customers in terms of where the insurer where the insurer is going to be domiciled. There will be, as Owen said, the issue of dual regulation. You will have to create a new regulator. A competent authority is the term that they use in the directives. Now, this is where you may gain an advantage. The Financial Conduct Authority and the huge regulatory burden that we have down in the UK. The impact on insurance brokers is quite significant. The direct and indirect regulatory cost burden of the UK's regulatory infrastructure sits at around 3%. Now that's 3 times the size of the second dearest in Europe. And here is where you may be able to steal a little bit of a march on us south of the border, because it would be hard to imagine you could create something more expensive and more bureaucratic than what we already have. But of course, as Owen said, you may well have the issue of having 2 regulators. And there you're into interesting issues, because if you are in the EU as an independent Scotland, we're into passporting issues. So you would have a passport to provide your services back south of the border. But if you weren't in the EU, you're talking about separate registration and authorisation and supervision by the UK regulator as well as your own. So a real threat there of potentially of dual regulation. And then you have the way in which directives are implemented. Because there's no guarantee that if you are in the EU with a separate regulator, your regulator and the FCA, there's no guarantee they'll implement the directives in the same manner. And that will be an issue for insurers with the forthcoming Solvency II directive. It'll be an issue for insurance brokers with the revised MiFID, a revised IMD, etc. So issues there. One of the issues that we raised with Treasury was this issue around competition issues, so potential loss of markets. People may decide not to trade across that border. There's a heavy Treasury paper in front of me on the table there, which is not directly related to this debate, but it does make the point that the borders act as barriers to trade. We don't have much of a border other than the remains of Hadrian's Wall. There's free movement. An independent Scotland would create a barrier, and barriers create issues. We made the point that investment in Scotland could be negatively impacted as smaller brokers choose not to open Scottish branches due to maybe dual regulation or the issues above. And the one thing we haven't touched on here, which would alarm our regulator for getting so far into this debate, what do customers think? What are customers going to want to do? Will customers, and we've heard it said already, most businesses in Scotland have more customers south of the border than in Scotland. Will customers south of the border want to trade north of the border? Borders, as I say, act as barriers. And let me caveat all of that by saying that BIBA is apolitical, so we have no position on independence. But I absolutely understand that you haven't dragged me all the way up here to have me sat squarely on the fence, so I will show a little bit of my true colours. I'm a Londoner. I'm English, I'm British, and I'm European. And I'm proud of all four of those. But over and above that, I'm a Democrat. The will of the people is what is important here. We need a full, frank, honest debate and let the public decide. Thank you very much.